The first time I caught someone dragging a kayak across my backyard, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe they were lost, confused, or just rude. But when I asked the woman mid-50s, peroxide blonde bob, clipboard in hand what she was doing, she puffed out her chest and said, "This is common space now. HOA voted. My name's Darren Jennings. I bought this lakeside property 7 years ago, specifically because of the private dock attached to it. That dock and the grassy slope leading down to it are all deeded in my name. I've got the blueprints, the tax records, and the surveyor's report to prove it." But none of that seemed to matter to Loretta Raines, the newly elected HOA president and self-declared queen of the cul-de-sac. She stood there like she owned the shoreline. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked, stepping between her and my dock. Loretta tapped the laminated map on her clipboard. "We had a vote last month. The board decided lake access should be equal for all residents, so we designated your yard and dock as community space." I blinked. "You can't vote away private property. It's for the good of the neighborhood," she said, giving me that tight-lipped smile Karens must practice in the mirror. "You'll still have access, of course. We just ask that you don't block others." I didn't engage further. I just walked back inside, closed the blinds, and pulled out the file folder labeled Property Records. I knew exactly what I was going to do. The next morning, I installed a steel post at the top of the slope and mounted a high-end electronic lock system with a keycard reader. Then I added a motion-triggered camera aimed directly at the path leading to my dock. I printed a sign and bolted it to the post. "Private property access restricted to owner. Trespassers will be prosecuted." By sunset, Loretta was back. She stood outside the gate, arms folded while I raked leaves nearby. "Darren," she called, "this isn't going to look good for you." "You mean me protecting my property?" "Yeah, I'll risk it." "You're obstructing HOA-approved common space. That's a violation," I laughed. "No, Loretta. What's a violation is attempting to steal private land under the guise of a vote you had no legal authority to hold," she scowled. "You'll be fined." "Then I'll see you in court," I said, flipping open the latch to my shed and pulling out a second camera to install. Loretta stormed off, muttering something about escalation and non-compliance. I didn't care. I had a plan and I wasn't bluffing. I filed a cease and desist letter the next day and hand-delivered copies to every board member, but Loretta wasn't finished, not even close. The lock held. For the next 2 weeks, I noticed fewer people ambling down the slope behind my house. The camera caught a few curious lookers' neighbors lingering just long enough to read the sign and glance at the card reader before retreating. But the peace didn't last. It was a Tuesday morning when I found the lock casing pried open and the wires inside slashed. I stood there staring at the damage, jaw clenched, while the camera feed loaded on my phone. Sure enough, just past midnight, 2 figures in hooded sweatshirts had crept up the slope. One carried bolt cutters, the other held a crowbar. They worked fast, methodical, and after destroying the system, they walked straight down to the dock and sat there for over an hour. I recognized the posture of the taller one. Even in the grainy night vision, the rigid stance and clipped movements were unmistakable. Loretta's son, Blake. Mid-30s, still lived with her, and had recently been added to the HOA's Security Subcommittee, a title that seemed to consist mostly of patrols in a golf cart he'd rigged with flashing orange lights. I called the police. 2 officers arrived within the hour. I met them on the porch and handed over the footage on a USB drive. "Property damage plus trespassing," I said, leading them to the gate. They cut through a powered lock system. "That's not just vandalism, it's tampering with security infrastructure." Officer Patel crouched near the post, examining the torn wires. "Looks intentional." "You said this was caught on camera," clear as day. Officer Green, older with a thick notepad in hand, asked, "You got legal documents proving this is your property, not HOA controlled?" I went inside and returned with the stamped county deed and a recent surveyor's map. Green flipped through it, nodding slowly. "This is airtight," he said. They didn't even try to argue it through the legal channels. They tried to vote it away at a board meeting, said a majority ruled it's now common space. Green raised an eyebrow. That's not how property law works. Patel stood up. We'll file a report and follow up with the DA. If your system was connected to power and had a recording device, it might qualify under state statute as criminal mischief in the second degree. Before they left, I handed them a second USB drive. I've been logging everything. Every time someone's come onto the property without permission, every time someone's tried to interfere, you'll find a lot more on there. That night, I replaced the lock with a new model, this time armored and recessed into a steel box. I also upgraded the camera system to stream directly to a cloud server. The footage was no longer stored locally. 3 days later, I got a letter taped to my front door. No envelope. Just a single sheet of paper with the HOA's letterhead and a list of infractions. The absurdity of it was almost laughable. Unauthorized barrier on community pathway, hostile signage, unneighborly conduct, and my personal favorite, obstruction of shared natural resources. At the bottom was a fine, $400. I didn't respond. I sent a copy of the letter to my attorney, Marlene. Marlene was a hurricane wrapped in a pantsuit. Retired civil litigator, lived 3 blocks over, and had despised Loretta since the first time she tried to ban vegetable gardens. We'd met at a neighborhood barbecue the summer prior, and when I told her what was happening, she took one look at the letter and said, "Oh, this is going to be fun." She filed an immediate motion with the county clerk to enjoin the HOA board from enforcing any fines or taking further action until the legal ownership of the dock and slope could be reaffirmed in court. We had all the documentation. The easement ended 10 feet before my property line. The HOA had no jurisdiction. Loretta responded by escalating. The following Monday, I came home from work to find orange spray paint across my retaining wall. Share the lake. The cameras caught the act. Same hoodie, same gait, same idiot son. This time, the police didn't even hesitate. Blake was arrested the next morning, charged with trespassing, property destruction, and defacing private property. Loretta screamed at the officers from her porch as they put him in the squad car, promising lawsuits and media exposure. The only person filming was Mrs. Delaney from across the street, who live-streamed the whole thing to the neighborhood Facebook group with the caption, "HOA royalty throws tantrum as Prince gets cuffed." By the end of the week, half the neighborhood was whispering. People started avoiding Loretta at the mailbox. A few even emailed me quietly, apologizing for not saying anything sooner. One neighbor, Carl from 2 doors down, admitted he'd been pressured into voting for the lake access proposal after Loretta told him it was just symbolic. She said it was more about unity, he muttered. Didn't realize she was planning to physically change things. She wasn't, I told him, not legally. Then came the audit. Turns out, Loretta had been using HOA funds to pay for maintenance work on the supposed common shoreline. A nosy board member who'd grown tired of being left out of executive meetings dug into the records and found receipts for landscaping, tool rentals, even a consulting fee to a recreational zoning specialist who didn't exist. Marlene got wind of it and forwarded the findings to the county district attorney's office. By the time the emergency board meeting was called, Loretta was already under investigation for misuse of HOA funds, property damage, and conspiracy to commit fraud. I attended the meeting, sat in the back, and watched as the board minus Loretta, who didn't show, voted unanimously to suspend her presidency pending the outcome of the investigation. The new interim president, a soft-spoken retired teacher named Ellen, approached me afterward. "Mr. Jennings," she said, holding out her hand. "I'd like to apologize on behalf of the board. This should never have happened." I shook her hand. "Thank you. I'd like to move forward, but I'm not removing the lock. No one's asking you to. In fact, we'd like to issue a formal correction to the neighborhood clarifying that your property is, in fact, private." "Good," I said. Because the next time someone steps foot down that slope without my permission, it's not just going to be a police report. It's going to be a civil suit. Ellen nodded. Understood. As I walked home under the porch lights, something caught my eye, a yard sign freshly planted in the lawn across the street. Big block letters, red on white, private property is not a suggestion. I looked around. 3 more signs had popped up on nearby lawns. Carl gave me a little wave from his front porch. For the first time in weeks, I laughed, not because I'd won, because people had finally started paying attention. The following week brought rain and with it, a strange quiet. No more strangers lingering near the slope, no new threats taped to my door. For a few days, it seemed like Loretta's downfall had taken the wind out of the HOA's sails, but I knew better than to let my guard down. Friday morning, I got a call from Marlene. "They're trying something new," she said before I could greet her. "I just got a copy of a zoning variance request submitted to the county. You'll love this. They're claiming the dock violates shoreline ordinances and is a hazard to the neighborhood's ecological integrity." I paused. That dock's been there since the 70s. They attached a fabricated environmental impact assessment, claimed it was from a local conservation firm, but I called the number listed doesn't exist. They forged the whole thing. I could hear her clicking on a keyboard. They even stamped it with an outdated department seal. Sloppy. Do we know who submitted it? The document was filed under the HOA's name, but the county clerk said it was hand-delivered by someone in a green SUV with government plates. I cross-checked archive photos from the last meeting. Loretta's cousin drives one, works for Parks and Recreation. I leaned against the counter, processing. So now they're trying to get the county to condemn my dock. Looks that way, but this is different. This crosses into actual criminal territory, falsifying official documents, impersonating a state agency. If we push this, we're not just dealing with HOA pettiness anymore. I didn't hesitate. Push it? That afternoon, Marlene filed a formal complaint with the county's office of the Inspector General and turned over the forged documents. Within 24 hours, the county launched a preliminary investigation. Things moved quickly from there. By Monday, 2 investigators showed up at Loretta's house with a subpoena. They were in plainclothes, but the neighborhood grapevine didn't miss a beat. Half the street watched from porches and windows as they went inside and didn't come out for nearly 2 hours. I stayed out of it. Let the process work. But something told me Loretta wasn't going to go down quietly, and I was right. Wednesday evening, Ellen stopped by. She looked uneasy. "Can we talk?" she asked, glancing at the slope behind me. I stepped aside and let her in. "There's pressure building on the board," she said as we sat in the living room. "Some of the older members are worried about exposure. They quietly approved a lot of Loretta's budget requests over the years without asking questions." I nodded. "So now they're trying to distance themselves." "Exactly. But here's the thing, someone's leaking information, selectively, making it sound like the board was tricked by a rogue president rather than complicit. I got an anonymous packet in my mailbox this morning. Claimed you were threatening people, trying to privatize the entire lake." I raised an eyebrow. "It included edited screenshots of your security footage, chopped up to make it look like you were chasing people off with a bat." I stood. "What?" "I know it's fake," Ellen said, holding up a hand. "The board isn't stupid, but someone's clearly trying to change the narrative, shift public opinion back their way." I walked over to the cabinet and pulled out the backup hard drive. "I've got the full recordings, every second. That never happened," I figured. "But Darren, this isn't just about your dock anymore. Loretta's trying to wrangle sympathy, paint herself as a victim of some vendetta. And if she's willing to fake an environmental report, I don't think she's above planting worse." I stared at the hard drive. "Then it's time we stop playing defense." That night, I reached out to a friend I hadn't spoken to in years, Jason, a local reporter who owed me a favor. We met at a diner off Route 30. "There's a story here," I told him, sliding over the printed timeline Marlene had helped me organize. Fake documents, misuse of funds, trespassing, private property rights, and now a smear campaign backed by selectively edited footage. He flipped through the pages, then looked up. You have proof of all this. Every single claim is backed. Names, dates, statements, and video. He nodded slowly. All right, I'll talk to my editor, but if we run this, it's going to get messy. You ready for that? I'm not the one who should be worried. The story ran 2 days later. Front page of the Sunday edition. Headline: HOA president under fire for alleged property fraud and document forgery. Inside, a full 2-page spread detailed the timeline, the investigation, and Loretta's history of questionable leadership tactics. The article included statements from neighbors, snippets from the forged report, and screenshots from the unedited security footage. The fallout was immediate. By Monday morning, Loretta's cousin was suspended from Parks and Rec pending a formal inquiry. The county prosecutor opened a criminal case for document forgery and impersonation of a public official. The HOA board held an emergency vote and officially expelled Loretta from her position, citing breach of fiduciary duty. But Loretta didn't go quietly. She held a press conference, or tried to. 5 folding chairs, a card table, and a hand-painted banner that reads "Save Our Lake" in red paint. Only 2 people showed up. Blake, who stood there with crossed arms, and a neighbor named Gloria who had loudly objected to solar panels last year. Loretta rattled off a list of grievances, accusations, and veiled threats, claimed she was being targeted by anti-community extremists, and hinted at a lawsuit for defamation. No one in the neighborhood took it seriously. The next day, her house went dark shades drawn, mailbox overflowing. I heard she'd hired a criminal defense attorney from across the state. Meanwhile, things in the neighborhood began to shift. Ellen called a community meeting at the library. Not at the HOA clubhouse. That space was under audit until they could prove it wasn't funded with misappropriated dues. I showed up half expecting hostility, but found something else entirely. People were listening. Carl, who'd once stayed neutral, stood up and proposed a revision to the HOA's Charter 1 that would require a full community vote for any changes affecting private property. A schoolteacher named Denise suggested term limits for board members. Even Gloria, the solar panel objector, admitted the board had overstepped. Then Ellen turned to me. "Darren, would you consider joining the board?" I blinked. "You serious? You've already done more to protect our legal rights than most of us ever have. We need that." I looked around the room. People were nodding. People who, a month ago, had kept their heads down and tried to stay uninvolved. "I'll consider it," I said. "But I'm keeping the lock." A few people laughed. Someone in the back clapped. As the meeting ended, I stepped outside and looked toward the lake. The dock lights glowed softly through the trees. Justice hadn't just been served, it had changed the neighborhood. The first official board meeting after Loretta's removal didn't take place in a formal venue. It was held in Ellen's garage, folding chairs and all, with a whiteboard propped up on 2 coolers, and a tray of oatmeal cookies no one touched. 5 board members showed up, along with a handful of residents who had previously avoided anything HOA-related like it was contagious. I arrived late, deliberately, not sure whether I wanted to be seen as part of the new machine or just a watchdog on the perimeter. "Darren," Ellen said as I stepped inside, "we saved you a seat." "I'll stand," I said, "just here to observe." The meeting opened with an agenda item no one seemed eager to read aloud, but eventually Harold, a retired dentist with a reputation for never raising his voice, spoke up. "There's a situation," he said, "involving financial discrepancies that go beyond what we thought." Ellen didn't flinch. "How far beyond?" Harold cleared his throat. "We received a letter from the auditor's office this morning. There's a second account unregistered." A parallel HOA slush fund Loretta was operating under the name Community Enhancement Reserve. It's been active for 6 years. The room quieted. "How much?" someone asked. "Over $83,000, Harold said. "Used for unapproved landscaping, private contractor consultations, and travel expenses." including a 4-day planning retreat in Key West. Who else had access? Ellen asked. Only Loretta and Blake. But the bank statements show transfers to a third-party account listed under a shell company. Name on the account is Ronald Jessup. My stomach dropped. That name rang a bell, not from the neighborhood but from one of the city's procurement blacklists. Jessup had been fined heavily 2 years prior for orchestrating a fraudulent bid scheme involving city park upgrades. I know that name, I said. He's banned from doing business with the county. Loretta funneled HOA money to him, Harold nodded. At least $20,000. Ellen leaned back slowly in her chair. This isn't just mismanagement, this is organized fraud. I stepped forward. Then it's time we stop treating this like a neighborhood screw-up and start treating it like a felony. The next day, I took the statements to the district attorney's office. Not just copies originals, notarized by the auditor. Marlene had already drafted a formal complaint packet, complete with the oversight violations, wire fraud implications, and a request for a criminal probe. I handed it to the clerk and signed the witness affidavit without hesitation. They didn't ask many questions they didn't have to. Loretta was arrested that Friday. This time, there were no porch-side tantrums, no red-letter banners or golf cart parades. Just 2 unmarked cruisers, a plainclothes investigator, and a warrant that included charges for embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and falsification of financial records. Blake was picked up the same afternoon, though not at home. He'd been caught shredding documents in a self-storage unit 2 towns over. The paper trail inside led straight to Jessup, who was already under investigation for a separate federal case. The neighborhood reacted like someone had pulled a splinter the size of a ruler from its foot. People who had never spoken to each other began chatting at the mailbox. Lawn chairs appeared on sidewalks. A few residents even started hosting dock nights in their own yards. No HOA approval needed. As for me, I finally agreed to join the board not out of ambition, but because I refused to let another Loretta take root. My first motion was simple: require all board members to disclose financial interests and submit to annual audits. It passed unanimously. Later that evening, I got a knock at the door. It was Carl, holding a manila folder and looking more nervous than usual. "I think you should see this," he said, handing it over. Inside were photocopies of old HOA newsletters back when Loretta first joined the board. One page stood out, a proposal from 7 years ago to integrate lakefront properties into HOA stewardship zones. I recognized the wording. The proposal had been rejected by the county, but Loretta had kept pushing it internally, rewriting it every year until it morphed into the Lake Access Initiative she'd used as her excuse to target my dock. She was planning this for years, Carl said. It wasn't about access. It was about control, I nodded. And now it's evidence. I added it to the growing case file. I'd been compiling copies of everything, archived in both digital and physical formats. Not because I still feared retaliation, but because I'd learned that HOA corruption doesn't die, it hibernates. In the weeks that followed, Loretta's house was listed for sale. The listing avoided any mention of her name, and the interior photos had been staged to erase all signs of her reign. The property sold within 2 days to a young couple who had no interest in politics or power plays. I welcomed them with a bottle of wine and a copy of the new HOA charter. "Just in case someone ever tells you the dock is common space," I said, handing it over. They laughed, but I didn't. We held a referendum that fall, open ballot, full transparency. 1 vote per household. We rewrote the HOA's authority limits, stripping away vague language and strengthening individual property protections. The document passed with 87% approval. At the final meeting of the year, I stood before the community, not as a victim of HOA abuse, but as someone who had seen its worst and come out the other side. "We're not here to control each other," I said. "We're here to protect one another's rights. That includes the right to privacy, to ownership, and to peace. No applause, no cheers, just a quiet agreement that hung in the air like fresh paint. Later that week, I replaced the steel post by the slope with a new one, same reader, better welds, and mounted a new sign. Not a threat, not a warning. Just 3 words: private, respected, protected. I didn't need cameras anymore, because now when people passed by they nodded, not out of fear, but because they understood something they hadn't before, that property lines aren't just lines in the grass, they're promises. And some of us keep them,